Yes, so the big game that I'm playing is, of course, Dark Souls, which is almost a religious cult right now in the
It's one of
area
the
video
darling
gaming.
franchises within the gaming universe.
Yes, and I started playing that, I mentioned it last week, because it has so many positive reviews and a lot of chatter. I just wanted to see what it was about. I mean, we're a professional gaming site, for God's sake, so we should know a little bit about this stuff. And I usually don't venture out of my comfort zone, but in this case, Dark Souls actually is within that comfort zone. I just never...
You think?
It seems that way. It's an RPG, it's an action RPG.
As we stated in previous shows, over and over and over, we are older.
Mm-hmm.
We've been around since, well, in my case, I've been around since even before the Atari 2600 and Intellivision.
Mm-hmm.
And we were playing the really old punitive style PC RPGs way back in the 80s. And, you know, in my case on console as well. And a lot of those games, they didn't guide you, they didn't hold your hand.
No, they were brutal.
They were brutal.
Yeah.
And Dark Souls is right down that particular alleyway that we've been down before.
Right.
So it is our kind of game. We love RPGs, we like Western style RPGs, and we like those oppressive and isolated type of environments that Dark Souls creates.
Yeah, and of course, we're also big fans of Skyrim and open world and things like that.
Yeah.
So this is
Dragon Age, Skyrim, and the Baldur's Gate games.
There you go. So this is, it fits within that mold. I just kind of stayed away from it because the reviews for the PC version have been pretty bad because it wasn't ported well, and because it's, mostly a console game, and I'm not.
And to preface a little bit, I want you to make that distinction between your complaints about the PC game because of the bad port versus the overall fundamentals of the game that, regardless of what version you're playing, you're going to encounter.
Right. So let's just jump right in here. So I got the PC version, obviously, because I want to play it on my PC. And right off the bat, I'll just echo exactly what everybody has already said about the PC version. It's not broken, but it is not ported well. It is ported very poorly. The biggest problem is that the camera controls are not tied to the mouse. And that, for any PC gamer out there, if you've never noticed before, cameras are always tied to the mouse one way or another because that's really the only device that you have that has analog-type functionality where you can, wave your hand and determine the positioning of the camera. You can do it with keys, but keys aren't precise because they're on-off and there's no in-between. So there's no speed. You can't determine the speed of the turning when you're using a key. So that's the biggest problem we have in the PC port. In order to play it on keyboard and mouse, you need to assign the camera separately from your movement. And that means when you're playing on the PC, one of your hands has to be removed from either the mouse or the movement keys in order to move the camera. Which is, of course, you can probably hotkey it close to your movement keys, but it's still incredibly difficult because you have to use two fingers at a time.
It makes you wonder, what were they thinking?
It was not fully ported. I think that they had a deadline that they needed to meet, or they just didn't care, and they just said, it works, let's just release it and put, controller recommended on the box. That's what.
And our fans love the game so much that it doesn't matter. It's Stockholm Syndrome, I'm telling you. They'll kick their fans in the crotch, and not to go back to the whole crotch thing, but they'll kick their fans in the crotch, and they know that, they're still gonna love us.
Yeah, so, no, I'm not gonna love them. I'm not gonna apologize for them either. This is a blunder. It's a significant blunder. I knocked it down a point. So again, if I start with an average of 5 in gameplay,
that's a big point.
I gave it. Well, it's 1 point. You get points back from other things, but this one case for the PC, the controls on the PC are pathetic. They are unacceptable. So that's the big issue. It is playable. You can get used to them, and some people do eventually master using the PC controls. But it's just not convenient, and it's not intuitive, and it takes another learning curve. I'm trying to play the game and just enjoy the game. You know how a lot of people prefer consoles because you can just plug it in and it works.
Yes,
that's with the me. PC, it's always more complex with the PC, but at the very least, I expect the game to have normal, WASD controls with a camera on my mouse. I mean, that's just the most basic.
At the very
thing.
least, the option if it's not the default.
Right, or at least give you the option. But the camera not being bound to the mouse, that's just, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't bind it. It's impossible. It's just not there.
And you know what's really aggravating about this is that From Software, I don't know who published the PC version, because the PS3 version was... Oh, well, no, I'm talking about Dark Souls. I'm confusing you. See, I caught myself in the mistake. Okay, so going back to... I don't know what they were thinking with the PC version, but they heavily marketed the PC version. And if it were like an afterthought, then I can understand why they would not put their best effort there in porting the game. But here, they put it out there. They call it Prepared to Die Edition. It was all over Steam. It was all over the various sites with all of the Demon Souls and Dark Souls fanboys, journalists promoting it. And the game came out, sounds like a broken mess.
Oh, that's just the start of it. So here is the bigger problem. So forget the controls for a second, because that's only, one issue, because you can always plug in a controller and play the game with a controller. So here is the second and probably biggest glaring issue. This game was released at XGA resolution. So this game, despite having options
explain
for 1080p,
what that means.
XGA is just old VGA monitors, the old tube things. That we used
the old
to use
tube
in the
things
old
that
days.
didn't have 1280 by 720 or 10
or above.
Yeah, or 1080p or 1080i.
There you go. So this game ships at 1024 by 768 resolution.
That's ridiculous.
That is, we're talking 1990s.
This is a modern game that on console came out in 720p.
That's right. So, and despite having settings in the game for 1080p, they don't do anything. So even if you set it to 1080p in the game, the resolution remains 1024 by 768. Now, I was saying earlier, I'm usually very critical of these kinds of bugs. In this case, I didn't knock it down as much because the rest of the game is actually playable, but I did knock it down a point for that because those graphics, even though I'm not a big graphics guy, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, and you had to install a patch in order to make it look acceptable.
And I'll explain that, yeah. So there is a workaround.
I actually want to hear more about the actual game than the technicals.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm just explaining the PC.
It's unfortunate that these are issues we shouldn't even be talking about.
Right. So, but these are the issues I ran into. I started this game, and I went into the character creation screen, and it looked horrible. I'm looking at the character that's sitting there on the right, and the little,
and you've got your Planescape Torment looking, as you described, the Planescape Torment.
I thought I was playing.
Character,
I was back in 1999 again. Playing Planescape Torment. Wow. I didn't believe it. I actually went online to figure out what was going on, and it turns out there is a fix. It's not a fix made by the company. It's a fix made by a modder. He created a fix that's called DS Fix. You can look it up on Google, download it, and you actually have to take these files, drop them into your install folder in order to get 1080p resolution. And once you do, it actually looks good. The game looks good. But it's mind-boggling that it wasn't even patched. So I downloaded the latest patch, I think it was 1.09 or something, and it still isn't patched. You have to get the DS Fix in order to get 1080p resolution and to make it look nice. So anyway, let's just go into the game here, but right off the bat, the PC version has lost 2 points from the gameplay
just because of the technical aspect, but these wouldn't be as big of an issue on the console.
Right, so for the console, these are not a deal, so just remember that as we continue on, and then you'll understand my score. So now here is the first problem I saw as soon as I started playing the game. Now, mind you, I started using a controller because I just didn't feel like memorizing the controls on the keyboard and mouse due to the camera issue. The first thing I realized is it uses a Devil May Cry camera. So, let me preface that. I only played Devil May Cry 1.
We're talking about the original Devil May Cry.
Right. Devil May Cry 1, as a lot of you recall, is another one of those fan favorites that is loved by many and far.
If I can interject just to explain why that's a bit of a fan favorite. Going back to that era, and I can remove myself from modern day and put myself back in the place of being a gamer 12 years ago, 13 years ago, whenever Devil May Cry came out. That game was created kind of on the heels of something like Resident Evil. So the whole structure of the presentation was just like Resident Evil. Fixed camera, fixed backgrounds, those different types of angles. Only unlike Resident Evil, it wasn't a shooter, you had a hack and slash.
Right.
And that was very innovative for its time. That was a different idea. Whether it works well or not is definitely an issue. Because I have played quite a bit of the first Devil May Cry last year.
Mm-hmm. So you have it fresh in your mind.
And I have it fresh in my mind.
Let me just make one correction here. It does not have a fixed camera.
The camera sucks.
It's not a fixed camera. So you just said, fixed camera. It's not. That's the problem. So the issue that I have with Dark Souls is the same thing I had with the first Devil May Cry.
It moves on its own.
The camera is not fixed. You have to control the camera even when you don't want it to move. So because it has collision detection, and even when you don't have collision detection, it turns when your character turns.
I don't think Devil May Cry you can turn the camera, right? You cannot turn it. It will turn on its own to give you, when you're moving across the environment, it will turn on its own to give you a better perspective.
I'm pretty sure you did.
I don't remember turning it.
I think you did.
Because I remember fighting that boss, that first boss, and that boss was such a pain because they would always move off screen. I couldn't see them and then attack me.
Or if you get close to a wall, then you get a view that's obstructed by a wall.
I would have to run around the environment to get an angle.
There you go. And you had to memorize the environment to know where the camera doesn't screw up.
Yeah.
And that's really what it boils down to. So, but I'm pretty sure you could move the camera with the second analog.
But Devil May Cry, to I guess give it a little bit of an apology, it didn't know any better. The designers didn't know any better back then. That's the difference between 13 years ago and now. And the developers know better. This is not acceptable in a modern game.
That's, I think we just touched on the topic or the problem very, very well. In Dark Souls, the camera will turn even when there are no collisions if you move your character around in a circle. And it doesn't move in a fixed position over your character. It is it's a loose camera. And that means that with the right analog, you are expected to always correct the camera, despite it moving, because it's moving. So the issue is, in this game, it's a Twitch game, where a few mistakes get you killed. A wrong roll, a wrong block, or a wrong attack results in getting hit, and sometimes getting stun locked, or even possibly running off of the cliff. Because you have to be precise. That's just the style of the game. It's very unforgiving in terms of mistakes. The problem is, because of the camera, you end up making a lot of inadvertent mistakes. You're not having a problem fighting the enemy. The enemy's right in front of you. You know what you have to do. But because the camera continuously turns as you are fighting, you sometimes miss. Sometimes you roll the wrong way. Sometimes instead of rolling behind him, you roll to the side. And that results in getting killed probably 50% more often than you would if it did not do that.
And you're getting killed by doing things that you never intended to do.
There you go.
And you know what? And you know what the Dark Souls, and yeah, I'm going to say it, the Dark Souls fanboys would say to you? You suck at the game.
No, I mean,
you're just not good.
Here's the bottom line. I can now play that game. I can beat the first demon with the starting weapon, the broken sword. I'm really good at the game. But the reason I became good is because I memorized the environment that he's in. And I memorized his animation. But that means that I had to spend a lot of time doing it over and over to memorize it. That's not fun. I mean, I know a lot of people like to brag about their skill, and even I have that skill now. But it wasn't fun. I wanted to stop playing. So that first demon that you encounter when you start the game...
Are we talking about Fatty?
The Fatty. So when you start the game, the very first enemy you encounter is a demon, a big fat hulking thing.
He kind of reminds me of either Godzilla or Asa for some reason. I don't know why.
Asa maybe, but I was thinking Jabba the Hutt because he's just, fat and he has a crack. But anyways, that's the first thing you encounter in the game, and there's no guidance in this game, so you don't know what you're supposed to do. They just throw you against it, and I thought I had to fight the thing. And I ended up dying, 7, 8 times to this thing because I just didn't know any better. And of course, this game, if he hits you twice, you're dead. You have to learn how to roll. You have to learn where to roll. You have to learn how to target. I'm getting acclimated with the controls, so I died a lot. It turns out, though, that you're not even supposed to fight that demon. A door that's all the way in the back left side of the room is open, and you're supposed to go into that door. Now, it just so happens the first 5 or 6 times I played, I never even saw the door. Because I'm on the other side of the room, and the camera just didn't turn that way for me to finally see it. And of course there's pillars in the way, so they were obstructing my view, and there were vases. So I was sitting here playing this demon, trying to figure out, and I almost killed him at one point, using that starter sword that it does like 2 hit
Not
points
a
of
starter
damage.
sword, that hilt.
The broken
That's
hilt.
all it was.
So I almost killed him just with that. And, eventually he did kill me, but over time I finally figured out that there was a door there because I learned how to dodge and get behind him and such. But the problem is there was no guidance, there was no indication of what to do. There was, they call it hand-holding. I call it guidance. It doesn't have to be hand-holding. I mean,
No,
just give me some
hand-holding
indication
hand-holding is this. Ni no Kuni. Yes, one of my favorite games of 2013, and it still is. And I still remember it fondly. But my gosh, half of that game, Drippy is constantly interjecting himself and giving you tutorials.
Drippy, yep.
Giving you tutorials every time you try to do something. I already knew what to do, and he'd still jump in and that's enough. I'm tired of the hand-holding. Mm-hmm. That was very hand-holding. That's very different. Just giving you guidance is a totally different thing.
Right. So in this one, there is some guidance, but it doesn't tell you what to do with this demon. So I just thought I had to fight him. There is, like on the floor, hints about how to play the game and controls. But there was no narrative in the beginning about what was going on, where you're at, except that you needed to get out. Okay. Well, anyway, so... God, I just drifted here. So I was talking about the bad camera, and then I also...
Well, you're talking about Fatty Demon, that you beat him after you discovered that there was the door in the back.
I think the point was the camera. The way that you figure out how to play despite the camera is to learn and memorize all of the enemies' movements and the environment that you're in. And to me, that is not a good game design. That means basically that...
It is to the fanboys.
It's not. I don't care what fanboys say. That is not good design. That is bad design that makes the game difficult, because the game otherwise, if you actually had a fixed camera over the character, wouldn't be an issue. You would be able to dodge much more easily. You'd be more precise with where you're hitting, where you're moving, and a lot of these fights would be trivial.
You would feel like you were more in control of what you were doing.
There you go. So really the challenge to this game isn't the fighting, it's the camera. It's getting the camera online so that you can dodge the right way.
It's a combination of it's the camera and the controls. The controls are giving you a lot of problems.
So, and just like you touched on when I started talking about this, we had games that were punitive in the old days, and we evolved past them. We came up with better game design so that the game actually made more sense, and it wasn't as frustrating. This one is just frustrating when you die because the camera obstructed your view of that pillar that you happened to run into while you were trying to strafe. You watched me do that yesterday. I ran into a pillar and that big fat dude hit me because I didn't see the pillar.
You didn't see the pillar.
View.
It obstructed your movement, and
there you go.
That was it.
And
everything is 1 hit, 2 hit. Especially if it's a big guy, it's usually 1 hit.
If it's a big guy, it's 1 or 2 hits, and you're pretty much toast. Even worse on those. I was I was playing in an area. I forgot what it was called. I think it's the depths, where a lot of the platforms were very narrow. And moving off the platform is instant death. And they can push you off the platform if they hit you in the right angle. So I was very careful of where I'm standing. But anyways...
another thing, and I wanted to say a few things because I watched you play it a little bit yesterday. Mm-hmm. Another thing I thought was funny, you can say it's funny, but it's also poor design because the AI is really stupid in this game. All they know is just straightforward. Once you trigger their acknowledgement of your presence, mm-hmm. It's just straightforward. They just come and attack you. But they're really stupid. They'll jump back off a cliff. And I saw that twice. Once off an actual cliff, another off of the bridge.
Yeah, you saw that when I was playing. Wow, okay.
And that was just within the span of 10-15 minutes. And I'm thinking, they didn't even put AI... And let's say what AI is. Artificial intelligence. They didn't put any artificial intelligence in these characters.
Yeah, so they probably gave them some pathing AI, but they didn't tell them how to deal with their animations regarding... So that the animations are not taken into account when it comes into pathing. So he will jump backwards off a cliff because it doesn't take that into account, which is pretty funny. I mean, it becomes laughable because a lot of the places on that depth area... If you're standing like 2 levels above him, he sees you, he starts to move towards you, and he does his moves because apparently he can, swing his sword 50 meters away from you, and somehow that's going to hit you because that's how the AI is set up in this game. He can actually jump off a cliff from 2 levels below you because he thinks he's fighting, and you can kill enemies that way. It's stupid. But,
it's cheap. And Golden Axe, the original?
Mm-hmm.
I used to like to deal with some enemies that way. There were parts where you could go background, foreground. So you can move in and out, background, foreground. And sometimes the area would open up where part of either the foreground or background was over a cliff. You could fall over it, or the enemies could fall over. So I go stand right next to it, and because the enemies were stupid and would run at you, I just wait till one of them dashed, and then move out of the way and watch them fly right over the cliff. And that's how I dealt with like half of the enemies in that game.
That's fine. And you know what? I'm not even going to knock it for that because I think that's fun.
That's fun.
Yeah,
no,
that's
that
funny.
was fun back then because that was more than 20 years ago. That was a launch title on the Genesis.
Yeah.
So that was in the 80s.
I wish that there were more launching abilities to the players' animations and attacks, but really there aren't very many. You can push enemies, but not very far. It would be a lot of fun if you had like a force push in this game and just send them flying. But I'm not going to knock it for the bad AI. I actually think that that's part of the fun in the game, watching these silly things happen. But I am going to knock it for the camera, and I knocked it significantly in my review because that camera accounts for probably 9 out of 10 deaths.
Well, the camera is a ubiquitous and pervasive issue that you have to deal with throughout the entire game.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, it's not like it's just one stage that's set up this way. Like some games, you'll have a stage where the camera suddenly shifts, and it's only one stage out of a dozen. And then you can knock half a point off of the game if you didn't like that design. Here, this is just how the whole game is.
That's how the whole game is. And unfortunately, the only way you can work around it, and that's all you can do is work around it, is memorize the game. And to me, that's not really skill. That's just somebody who spent a lot of time on the game, and you just happen to know where all of the right spots are.
There was a game called My Hero. It was an old arcade game all the way back in the mid-'80s, and I had it on my Sega Master System. And all it was, if anybody can remember how arcade games were back then, it was just a loop of the same 3 levels over and over, with just quicker enemies as the difficulty increased. And that was just pure pattern recognition. That's all that game was. You would walk past a building and someone would throw a bottle at you. You could time it to where you could kick the bottle and kick it into the enemies that were coming from the side of the screen, trying to punch you or kick you. And when I got the memorization down in that game, I was getting millions and millions of points because that's all it is. There's no challenge anymore once you memorize everything.
Yeah.
And that's just, but it's also so repetitive. We've gone or grown so far beyond that it's almost unacceptable now.
Right, and that's my biggest problem with this game. So let me touch on a couple of more things here. The reason this camera isn't quite as bad as Devil May Cry is because there are two options for the camera in the options menu. You can actually choose either a auto collision detect camera, which is atrocious. That's the one where if you're in a tight quarter, it will bump a wall and it'll flip the whole thing around, and it's almost unplayable in closed areas. Or you can have one that does not consider collision. But even without the collision, the camera still spins freely and loosely as the character moves. So they're both very bad options. One isn't as bad as the other, but still, it's still a problem in the game that pervades throughout the game. So those are my two biggest, I guess that is my biggest issue with the game. If it were not for the camera, there is a great game under that.
And that's the sad thing. That's the sad thing. There is a lot to criticize about this game, aside from the poor port.
Right.
And what's even worse, what's even more tragic about that is, like you just said, there's a great game underneath all of that.
There is a fantastic game under there. I love the weapons. I love the weapon animations. The character has a plethora of weapons to choose from. There are a lot of classes.
And you told me yesterday you like the environments, too.
I actually like the environments. I do feel that the world is a lot smaller than like a Skyrim type game, because it just feels like it shifts from one environment to the other like in a frame. You just step over like this line, and all of a sudden the environment colors change.
It's kind of like you're walking into a different room, and that's kind of it, all in the same little building.
And the change is too abrupt. It doesn't feel like a natural progression from this area to that area. It just feels like it's cramped.
You were saying, because I did want to hear what you said, and I interrupted you,
but
about the
really
weapons, the weapons in each character.
Yeah. So the weapons, I love the way that the weapons work in this game. Each weapon has several animations, 4 per weapon per style that you use. So you have the strong attack, the normal attack, and then you have movement attacks. You push a direction and attack, and it does a different animation and results in different kinds of damage.
And that means that there are different strategies to using different types of weapons.
But it's not just that. So that's 4 when you're only wielding with one hand. You can dual wield the weapon, and that'll give you another 4 animations with that same weapon. You can also have a second weapon in the other hand and wield 2 weapons at the same time, or you can have a shield. So there's so much depth to the combat. I really, really like the combat. I like the enemies. The enemies have a lot more animations and attack sequences than most other games that I played, even Skyrim. Skyrim enemies don't have as many animations. They're usually just like 3 or 4. These guys have longer animation sequences, more interesting attacks. Even those silly skeletons at the beginning of the game, they had a quick slice and dice attack, a jumping attack, side attacks, power attacks, and that's just a regular, fodder enemy that's just sitting there.
Yeah.
In Skyrim, you have a wolf that just runs up to you and bites, or mauls, or whatever. So, I really like that about this game. I like the weapon variety. I like that you can upgrade your weapons. I like the way that the currency. I actually like the idea of the souls and losing your souls if you die once and then having the opportunity to get it back. It reminds me a lot of my old days in EverQuest. So EverQuest was very punitive also. You can't just respawn and be ready to go charge in again and fight some more. You have to go and find your equipment, get it all back, re-equip, prepare yourself, and then fight some more. Because that added a lot of strategy. You can't just charge in blind and have easy mode, if you will. They call that easy mode. That's hand-holding to me. I like that. I think that kind of thing adds challenge. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I don't mind it. I think that I like that. The only thing that prevents this game from being good in that aspect is the camera. I'm dying not because I'm not playing well, but because I have to fight that damn camera, which puts me in positions.
Yeah, and there's your real enemy.
Mm-hmm. There you go. So what else? The environments are actually very good, despite my complaint that it feels like it's a small world. It almost feels like you know what? This is a perfect comparison. It feels like Disneyland. You know how when you're walking around Disneyland, if you just take one step in the direction of Tomorrowland, all of a sudden everything
it suddenly
looks different?
Changes to different aesthetic. Right. And
exactly.
Yeah.
It feels like Disneyland. It's just like you took one step and all of a sudden everything is just different. And that's not a bad thing. It just means it feels a lot smaller than like Skyrim. Skyrim, you're walking around and the change is progressive. And it changes as you're moving, and you don't necessarily notice it right away until, a while later, all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is all different now. I went from
especially when you're going from plains to like climbing a mountain, and it suddenly gets very inclement.
There you go.
It's like you were just down in a nice, sunny, beautiful, idyllic-looking environment. Now you're in a snowstorm. And that's some awesome stuff in those games.
So, and again, I'm not knocking it down. I'm not knocking Dark Souls down for that, because I do think that the environments are very interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that's what they were going for with Dark Souls. It's not a big open world type game, but I do appreciate the oppressive nature of the environments. It gives it character, and this is every time I compare games, and I always go back to The Last of Us, as many of you out there have already heard, probably over hundreds of times. That game, I think, is one of the most overhyped games I've ever seen, and that's 35 years of gaming history there. That game, the environments had no character in The Last of Us. It was just a regular urban city with overgrowth because nobody's lived there for a while. That's it. There was nothing interesting about the environments. I go to games like Silent Hill. That Silent Hill is the main character. The environment is the main character. It is dynamic. It changes. It throws things at you. It's a character in the game. Last of Us, it was not. The environment's just, just pick your own whatever urban American city and just throw people in there, and there you go.
Yeah.
And here, I appreciated that in watching you play Dark Souls. I like the environments. They're oppressive. They have character and personality. You feel a little bit tense. I've heard that as being one of the things worth praising about this game that a lot of people have cited in reviews or commentary. That, yeah, it's really cool looking. It has cool environments. And when you're exploring in that environment, it makes all the difference. It makes all the difference in the enjoyment of it. It's just too bad the camera sucks.
Yes. So the exploration is pretty fun. I like going into the nooks and crannies of every area that I'm in, and they're interesting. So the depths that I was playing in were very different from the starting area that you saw when you started a new game. And it was interesting. If it wasn't for just minor AI issues, them falling off the cliff, or that camera that's pervading, then I think I would have enjoyed this game immensely. But as it is now...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as it stands now, the problem with Dark Soul and the camera and controls override my enjoyment.
Yeah.
I cannot get immersed in this thing because I'm more concerned about correcting the damn camera than I am about playing the game.
Well, the controls are how you're interacting with the game you're playing.
There you go.
That's just how it is. And if your controls, if that conduit to experiencing the world within that virtual reality of the video game, if that conduit is broken,
there you go.
Then
you're
not going to enjoy it anymore.
Right. The only way you can enjoy it is if you memorize the whole thing. But if you memorize the whole thing, then it becomes boring.
It's fundamental to design, and these guys are getting way too much praise for their broken designs.
So bottom line,
we need to criticize them more so they can fix this, so that we can enjoy, even if it's still one hit you die type stuff. Mm-hmm. We can enjoy it because at least when we get hit and we die, we're not cursing the camera and feeling like if it weren't for this control, if it weren't for the camera, I just would have been able to do it.
And that is exactly right. So a good comparison. A good game to compare to Dark Souls is probably not Skyrim. Skyrim would be...
They're very different games.
They're very different. And Skyrim, in my opinion, is a more complete Dark Souls. Because you can make Skyrim very hard if you want to. All you have to do is just
slide the difficulty all the way up.
To the top, you'll die in 2 hits. There aren't as many enemies, of course, but it's still much harder if you do that. But Skyrim is a more complete game. I think Dark Souls is a good start to something that can be great, if they just fix these small minor issues. And they need to add a few things.
I wonder how it compares to Dark Souls 2, which just came out a few months ago.
I haven't played it. Dark Souls 2 hasn't received as good a reviews as Dark Souls, but I don't know. I haven't played it. But I think that a game that is more like Dark Souls would be Zelda. Just any modern Zelda is very close to Dark Souls, but even Zelda has more aspects to it. It has puzzle solving. It has other things in story.
Yeah, there is so much layered in a Zelda game.
Exactly, and I feel like Dark Souls is just basically a Zelda light.
Yeah,
I mean that's what it feels like.
And if there was something that I could at least, from my observations, critique from watching people play Dark Souls, is it just seems real. I don't want to say ordinary, but it just seems repetitive. It's just the same type of thing over and over. It's a good thing the little minutiae you talked about, like weapon selections and being able to upgrade and having different strategies. Those things are there. But the actual meat of the gameplay is just the same thing, over and over.
There's a lot of repetition. The bosses are very cool in that game. You didn't really see any except for that first starting
boss. Except for Fatty Demon.
Who was really not
I know that there are dragons. There's this one dragon that kind of follows you around, and
he doesn't follow you around, but he just shows up.
Well, he shows up and
almost kills me once.
Yeah, until you discover how it is that you can take him down.
I tried to kill him several ways. Just talking about that dragon, there is a corridor under the bridge, and kind of like a opening area where you can stand and shoot him. And his AI is so stupid that after you shoot him, because he can't hit you, he'll just go back to the same position and you can shoot him again. And I did manage to do a lot of damage to him, but it looks like he regenerates health. I shot like 500 arrows. And it keeps getting him to about 3/4 health, but I can't seem to drop him any more than that. He just continuously regenerates.
That's because they want you to go and fight him face to face.
Fight him some other way. But he did drop a sword while I was doing that, and that sword was insanely overpowered.
He hacked up the sword?
Yeah, so I was shooting him, and all of a sudden I get this pop-up that you found a sword. How I got the sword when he's sitting over there and I'm down here, I don't know. But
maybe he tried to breathe fire on you and it just kind of traveled with the fire.
I don't know, but I think it was called the Drake sword, and that sword was ridiculously overpowered. I only had a halberd at the time, and the halberd is slow and kind of limited to its motion. This sword is fast and twice as powerful. But anyway, that's the fun part of the game.
I do want to say, and I was going to ask you, but I'll ask you now, but I do want to say that before this becomes the Dark Souls podcast, we should probably move on. Will we see a review?
You will see my review. A lot of people are going to flame me for the review because I'm going to score it pretty low.
Okay, so warning, heads up for everyone. It's like an exclusive Game Tangents announcement. You are warned. Before this goes live on our website and various other websites who disseminate our content.
Yeah, so it's going to be a low score, again, because of the way that I score things. If it starts at a 5, and the gameplay is knocked down several points because of the camera, there's almost no way for this game to recover to average again, despite the other good things about it. Because that camera pervades. No matter how good the other elements are, that camera, you can't get away from it. And the dying and the constant frustration can only be alleviated with memorization, and I don't like those kinds of games.
Yeah, okay.
That's not me. So, anyways,
let's
continue.
Let's move on to what I've been playing. I assume that's pretty much the extent of what you played.
I mean,
aside from where we can overlap, because we do overlap last weekend. So we were playing games together, so we can talk about those.
Yeah. So let me just close it out here, just make one last mention. Again, that score is going to be low, but people need to understand that doesn't really mean much, because my favorite game of all time, Morrowind, I scored it a 7 because of technical issues, because out of the box it had a lot of issues. This game, I believe, is going to be almost the same. It's definitely not like Morrowind. Morrowind I enjoyed immensely. This game, I want to say that I only enjoy it about a quarter of the time that I play, which is unfortunate. So, but the score is not reflective of the parts that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
It's reflective of the issues in the game, the technical issues.
And unfortunately, they're so glaring that
and there you go.
You cannot avoid making mention.
There you go. So
okay, let's move on to what I have been playing. But before I really get into what I've been playing, and this is going to be short, by the way. Mm-hmm. Before I do that, I want to announce a new series. I'm going to try to get these videos up every week, and I'm thinking every week by Friday, probably before we get the podcast recorded, since it's going to be an overlap. And here's my idea. We talk about what we're playing, just like we have been for the last, 45 minutes. We talk about what we've been playing every episode, and it always makes for stimulating conversation. But what's sad is that you guys that are listening can't see what we're playing. So sometimes you don't know what we're talking about if it's not a game you have experienced for yourself. So I decided, why don't we try something new and start putting together some videos of some of the games that we have been playing. At least the games that I can capture with my video equipment.
And I can show why some of the things that I talk about or
exactly,
you talk about
exactly.
And in the game.
And they'll be short videos, 10 to 15 minutes long, I hope. Try to keep it in that range.
Yeah.
And we'll go over the various games that we're playing. It's called What Are You Playing? And currently I have episode 1 uploading or uploaded as we speak. I believe it is now uploaded on YouTube, and we will be posting it everywhere that we can, as well as our Facebook page on GameTangents.com. So go there. As of this recording, when this releases, it will be up. You'll be able to go and view what I've been playing. So, if you want to know what I've been playing, watch the video. And I go into detail with a great deal of video that corresponds to what I'm talking about.